and welcome to Drummers Review. I'm Nolly and today we're looking at a Noble & Cooley 14x7-inch solid shell classics tulip wood snare drum. Noble & Cooley dates all the way back to 1854, and in fact there are still 6th and 7th generation members of the Cooley family working in the factory in Massachusetts. Noble & Cooley claim that these were the first steam-bent solid shell drums of the modern era. They first came out in the 1980s and they've been adopted by many players since. They're definitely a classic in the world of snare drums. This drum has a 1/4 inch thick solid tulip wood shell and it comes in a honeyburst finish. This drum features Noble & Cooley's nodal point lug system, whereby there's only one set of lug posts placed in a particular point on the shell, the idea being that you get a richer and longer sustain from the drum. This is a handmade drum. It's made in the USA, but here in the UK they can be bought for £1,275. Let's check out how it sounds in a few different tunings and come back for some more comments. Our first impressions upon unboxing was that this is a very classy looking drum. I particularly like those gold lugs offset against the honeyburst finish and the black hoops. The whole package blends nicely. I think it could go in a lot of different situations. It doesn't really pigeonhole you to any style. It's also worth noting that despite being quite a large snare drum, it's actually a very lightweight instrument. This drum was submitted for review with an Evans coated G1 on the batter side and a snare side 300 on the Rezo side. However, one neat little thing if you're ordering from Noble & Cooley is you can specify your choice of heads, whether it's Remo, Evans or Aquarian. Sonically, this drum is on the warmer end of things. It's not an aggressive sounding snare. It's got a long but pleasing sustain with quite a pure overtone. We did find that with a single ply head, this drum really didn't seem to like that lower tuning range. It was very hard to nail the tuning in there, and it just didn't seem to come to life particularly. However, once we brought it up into the mid-tuning, it really came into its own. That sustain became very pleasing, and as we cranked it up into the high tuning, the attack took on a very nice funky pop to it. It definitely seems like Noble & Cooley's nodal lug system seems to do something, whether it's to do with the positioning or just the light mass of the hardware and minimal intrusion into the shell. The drum does have that kind of longer resonance than you might expect from a snare drum. And while this might not be to everybody's taste, you might find that trying a different snare head on there could shorten sustain while still keeping a nice blend of harmonics too. We feel like this would be a good choice of snare drum for those of you who favor a medium tuning and perhaps don't play in particularly heavy styles. It's also worth noting that if you're somebody that really likes to crank your snare drum, you might find that the 7-inch depth means you do lose a little bit of definition in that higher tuning range. However, Noble & Cooley do offer a shallower depth option on the same drum too, so if you like the general tonality but want something that's a bit crisper, you might want to look into one of those. The build quality with this drum is truly excellent. Fit and finish are perfect, and the bearing edge is just a joy to run your finger around and feel just how smooth it is. The drum tuned up very easily apart from in that lower tuning range, and pretty much our only gripe that we could mention would be that strainer. The throw-off is just so long on it that it's quite clumsy to get on and off quickly, and furthermore, as you're bringing it up into place, there's such a long throw that you hear the snare wires engaging over quite a long period of time. So instead of being something discrete, it's quite an obvious event as you bring the snare wires into place. One potential concern could be that those tube lugs being only attached at one end could bend over time, or if it takes some knock when you're on the road, you might end up with lugs that are difficult to screw into. However, it is quite a noticeable look, and you certainly recognize it as a Noble & Cooley drum when you see it. It's interesting to note that the air vent is on the same level as those lug posts. There's nothing in the literature to expressly state why, but I'd be curious to know why it's not just in the center of the shell as with most other drums. Our experiences with this drum definitely corroborate what Noble & Cooley have to say about their tulip wood solid shell drums. It's got that darker tonality and a long sustain, something perhaps more close to what you might expect from a free-floating drum. However, at that price point, Noble & Cooley have some very stiff competition here in the UK. No doubt the price has a lot to do with just how expensive it is to ship drums over from the States and pay the import taxes and everything else that goes into getting the drums onto the market here. But if you think about some of the custom builders that exist over here, or even the premium offerings from mass manufacturers, it's kind of difficult to imagine this being a drum that's going to make sense for everybody. I think it's mainly going to be a drum that caters to collectors out there who specifically want Noble & Cooley drums, or those with fairly deep pockets. I do think it's a shame because this is obviously a great drum that's been built with a lot of care and attention, and at a lower price point, no doubt it would appeal to a lot of drummers. As it is though, I think it might end up getting ruled out by a lot of people when they're shopping for a new snare drum, just based on how much it does cost. For those of you who do end up owning one though, you're going to have a drum that will hopefully last you for many decades to come. I really hope you've enjoyed watching this video. Do leave comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Drummer's Review to stay up to date with all the reviews we put out as and when they become available. Thanks, and see you next time.